Most people don't have a money problem. They have a perception problem. They believe that what they earn is who they are, that the number sitting in their account on any given Tuesday is a verdict on their life. And somewhere along the way, between the rent payments and the car payments and the quiet dread that shows up around the 25th of every month, money stopped being a tool and started being a mirror. This is the story of what actually changes at every level of net worth. Not the numbers, the psychology. At zero or below it, life operates differently than most people admit out loud. There's a cognitive weight that comes with financial scarcity that researchers have measured. It's not just stress, it's a reduction in mental bandwidth. When you're calculating whether you can afford groceries and still make rent, your brain is running a constant background program, a financial threat detection system that never fully turns off. You're not broken, you're depleted. Someone living paycheck to paycheck isn't making bad decisions because they lack discipline. They're making decisions under a kind of cognitive tax that people above them on the wealth ladder simply aren't paying. Every choice costs more mental energy. Every unexpected expense, a $300 car repair, a medical bill, a delayed paycheck, isn't an inconvenience. It's a crisis. And here's the part that gets quietly ignored in every personal finance conversation. The psychology of scarcity creates behavior that looks like irresponsibility from the outside, but is actually a very rational response to an environment of uncertainty. When you don't trust the future to be stable, you consume now. When tomorrow feels uncertain, the $40 dinner makes emotional sense, even when the spreadsheet says otherwise. This isn't weakness, it's present bias, a deeply human response to perceived instability. The real problem at zero net worth isn't spending. It's the mental model that spending is the only form of relief available. Now move to $10,000. Something subtle shifts here. Not freedom, not yet, but breathing room. The difference between $0 and $10,000 in savings isn't a number. It's the elimination of a specific kind of fear. The fear of a single bad month erasing everything. At $10,000, you start making slightly longer decisions. You can think 2 months ahead instead of 2 weeks. The cognitive tax doesn't disappear, but it lightens. This is where people encounter a dangerous illusion. The comfort of $10,000 can feel like a rival, like the problem is solved. And so some people stop here, not by choice, but because the acute pain is gone, and human beings are wired to stop solving problems that have stopped hurting. Hedonic adaptation is quiet like that. The relief you felt at $2,000 in savings becomes the baseline at $10,000. The baseline at $10,000 becomes inadequate at $50,000. The target always moves. At $50,000 net worth, the psychology becomes more interesting. This is where identity starts to enter the conversation. You're no longer just surviving. You're starting to define what financial success means to you. And that definition is heavily influenced by everyone around you. Your peer group, your social media feed, the car your coworker drives, the vacation your college friend just posted. Social comparison is not a moral failing. It's evolutionary. Humans have always measured their standing relative to others. But in a world where everyone's highlight reel is permanently visible, the comparison engine runs hotter than it was ever designed to. At $50,000, a lot of people make a very specific mistake. They upgrade their life to match their income rather than their net worth. The raise comes in, the apartment gets nicer, the car gets newer, the dinners get more expensive, and the number barely moves. Lifestyle inflation isn't just a budgeting problem, it's an identity problem. When status consumption becomes part of how you understand yourself, when the restaurant you eat at and the brand on your jacket are load-bearing walls of your self-image, cutting back doesn't feel like saving money. It feels like losing yourself. That is the trap, and it's invisible from inside it. $100,000 is a psychological milestone that doesn't get enough credit. Not because of what it buys, because of what it proves. Reaching $100,000 in net worth, whether that's savings, investments, equity, or some combination, is evidence that the system can work in your favor, that money can accumulate, that the balance can go up instead of down. For a lot of people, this is the first time they experience money as something that works while they sleep. A $100,000 portfolio earning 7% annually generates $7,000 in a year. That's roughly $583 a month produced without additional labor. The psychological shift that comes with watching that number compound, watching money make money, is one of the most significant changes in financial psychology a person can experience. It doesn't make you rich, but it makes you think differently about what money is for. Before this threshold, most people see money as something you earn and spend. After it, you start to see money as something you deploy. The relationship changes. The emotional charge around spending changes. The way you evaluate a $200 purchase changes. Not because $200 matters more, but because you now instinctively calculate what that $200 could become. That's compounding psychology, and it's worth more than the interest. $250,000 is where something quietly breaks for a lot of people. You're earning well, maybe six figures. The apartment is nice. The vacations happen. From the outside, everything looks assembled. And yet, there's a persistent low-grade anxiety that doesn't match the life you're living. You feel behind. You can't fully explain why. You check your accounts more than necessary, not because you're in trouble, because the fear of trouble hasn't left, even though the actual threat has. This is one of the stranger psychological phenomena in personal finance. The anxiety doesn't scale down with wealth as quickly as it scales up. The habits of financial fear, the background monitoring, the tension before checking a statement, the guilt after a large purchase. These patterns get installed early, and they run quietly for years after the original threat is gone. At $250,000, a lot of people are living a life that looks free and feels constrained. Not because of the money, because of the mental model they built when they had none. $500,000 is where the conversation about freedom becomes real. Not because $500,000 is retirement. In most cities, it's not. But because at this level, you start to have options that didn't exist before. A $500,000 portfolio at 7% generates roughly $35,000 annually. That's not a salary, but it's a cushion. It's leverage. It's the ability to take a lower-paying job you actually want, or walk away from one you don't, without the decision being driven by pure survival. Freedom isn't a destination. It's a margin. And $500,000 buys you margin. The people who reach this level and feel the most free aren't the ones who spend the most. They're the ones who made the least number of identity upgrades on the way up. They kept their cost of living anchored while their net worth grew. And now the gap between what they earn and what they need is wide enough to breathe in. That gap is the real asset. And then there's $1 million. In dollar terms, $1 million producing 7% annually generates $70,000 a year. In many parts of the world, that's a livable income, generated entirely by capital, not labor. But here's what the psychology books say happens at this milestone, and it's not what most people expect. The number itself doesn't change how you feel as much as you thought it would. The happiness researchers call it the hedonic treadmill. The goalpost moves. The arrival you imagined feels different in person than it did in fantasy. What does change, for the people who use this level wisely, is the elimination of financial coercion. The feeling of having to stay in the job, having to take the client, having to tolerate the thing you've been tolerating. At $1 million, for the first time, many people discover what they actually want. Because for the first time, what they want doesn't have to compete with what they need. That's a psychological shift so significant that some people find it disorienting. Identity, for decades, has been organized around financial pressure. Remove the pressure, and the question becomes, who are you when money isn't running the program? Here's the thing that connects all of these levels. The money changes. The external conditions change. But the internal architecture, the beliefs about safety, about worth, about what you deserve, those don't update automatically. They update slowly, consciously, or not at all. The person who was anxious at 0 is often still anxious at $500,000. Not because they're irrational, because they built a nervous system around scarcity, and that system doesn't receive a software update when the bank balance improves. Financial freedom, at its deepest level, is not about a number. It's about the relationship between your psychology and your money. It's about whether your financial decisions are being made by your goals or by your fears. Whether you're building a life or just managing the aftermath of not having one. The wealthiest version of your future isn't the one with the highest net worth. It's the one where you finally stop letting past financial fear make present financial decisions. And that work, that specific work, doesn't begin when you hit a milestone. It begins when you recognize what's actually been running the program.